Tell her to stop acting like a real pilot, please." Nobody spoke. Even the SEALs seated close by remained mute, merely casting sidelong glances as if they were examining a stain on their uniform. The woman stood motionless with her food tray in hand, her hair tied back tightly, and her pilot's outfit a little ragged at the edges. However, an elder SEAL suddenly grabbed his coffee cup so tightly that the liquid spilled all over the place. He fixed his gaze on a tiny tattoo that was visible on her wrist. Who was she? And why would a person who has witnessed death suddenly appear terrified? A pilot from Nevada Air Force Base named Lieutenant Elena Voss had come aboard the aircraft carrier to assist with joint training exercises. As soon as she was on board, she might as well have been invisible. On its own, the first lunch was a masterclass. Have we run out of actual pilots? Girls are being allowed to use helicopters for pretend play. A group of Navy pilots at the middle table made the remark loud enough for everyone to hear. Elena did not respond. She picked the table farthest away from the others and just placed her tray in the corner of the mess hall. Long ago, she discovered that using combative language only made matters worse. A sliver of ink appeared on her left wrist as she rolled up her sleeves to eat. A rifle barrel with a Black Hawk sitting on it. Complex and purposeful. The tattoo was tiny and easily overlooked, unless you were aware of what to search for. A grizzled SEAL with 23 years of experience, Chief McKinley stood motionless at the coffee station, staring at that tattoo, his face turning pale, but he said nothing. The deliberate rejection was oppressive. When she walked up, the conversation died. When she attempted to attend briefings, groups scattered. She was handled as though she had some infectious failure, even by the less experienced enlisted troops. On the other side of the room was a friendly-looking Latino logistics specialist, Staff Sergeant Victor Harlan. He appeared to be trying to break the wall of stillness that surrounded Elena by saying something. But aboard a ship where reputation was everything, unity had its limits. Someone whispered, "She doesn't belong here." Behind Elena's back, in war zones, female pilots are a liability. Elena continued to eat, carefully slicing her meatloaf into squares. For 12 years, she had heard variants of this conversation. A weary ache of resignation had taken the sting out of the words. Elena worked alone on helicopter inspections during afternoon maintenance checks. Despite having perfect technical knowledge and excellent reports, hardly anyone recognized her skills. Sailors abruptly developed urgent responsibilities elsewhere when she asked for help carrying heavy equipment. She heard two mechanics talking about her presence in the hangar bay. If command is sending us, they must be desperate. Diversity in hiring. I wonder what she did to obtain permission to fly. Although Elena's jaw tensed, she carried on with her task. After years of establishing her worth, she watched as her accomplishments were dismissed as the result of favoritism or quotas. Physical tiredness was only one aspect of the exhaustion. It was the bone-deep exhaustion of defending oneself. Elena withdrew to her designated quarters as nightfall drew near. The tiny room was impersonal and claustrophobic, like a jail cell. She gazed at the tattoo on her wrist while sitting on her bunk. Not many knew what it meant, and those who did weren't discussing it. The beat of the ship throbbed at her, the metallic creaks of a moving floating city, the distant chatter of crew members, a hum of engines. Ever since flight school, Elena had aspired to serve aboard the carrier. Lonelier than she had anticipated, the truth was. Her thoughts were disturbed by a gentle knock. Standing in her doorway with 2 coffee cups was Victor Harlan. He offered her one and remarked, "Thought you might want some?" There was a hint of hesitation in his voice that this gesture demanded bravery. While examining his face, Elena took the coffee. "Thank you, ma'am. May I ask you a question?" Victor asked, looking down the hallway to make sure they were by themselves. Did the question hung in the air like smoke. Have you ever flown missions? In Afghanistan, specifically in Kunar province? Elena remained silent, but her look remained unchanged. Victor's eyes became a little wider. There were rumors about a pilot who vanished in 2011 while on a covert mission. Although her body was never found, they claimed she had died. Elena looked away as she sipped her coffee. Depending on who is telling them, stories can change. Tap follow if you think silent strength is worthy of more than just a look. Silence speaks louder for some legacies. In social exile, Elena's days settled into a pattern of professional competence. She kept helicopters in good working order with accuracy, skillfully examined flight data, and participated in briefings where her opinions were routinely disregarded. A young airman unintentionally dropped his wrench kit in the maintenance bay, sending tools flying all over the deck. To assist in gathering them, Elena knelt. However, the sailor swiftly grabbed everything back, as though her touch might taint his gear. He said, "No offense, ma'am. I just heard stuff." He said, retreated, his tools gripped tightly for protection. Elena brushed dust off her knees and straightened. "What kind of stuff?" the airman asked, his expression hardening. "You?" "No, just tales of why the implications hurt more than outright insults." "You're really here." Not only was Elna no longer welcome, but she was also now untouchable. A living reminder of the controversy that nobody wanted to talk about. That night, Victor discovered her in the hangar, doing maintenance checks that weren't supposed to be done until the next week. She worked with deliberate vigor, as though being occupied would stop the murmurs that followed her everywhere. Lieutenant Victor stepped forward cautiously. "What you mentioned about story shifting has been on my mind." Elena didn't glance up from her checklist of inspections. "Additionally, I viewed some old, preserved video from Afghanistan's forward operations bases." It took some research, but he hesitated, considering what he was saying. A 2011 rescue mission is captured on camera. 3 injured soldiers were rescued from a blazing HH-60 Pave Hawk by a helicopter pilot. On her clipboard, Elena's hand stilled. In the video, the pilot has a tattoo. The positioning and design are identical to yours. Victor lowered his voice to a whisper, just above it. She was on tape, alive, bringing injured guys to safety, even though the mission report stated she was killed when the bird went down. The distant buzz of the ship's engines was the only sound for a long time. At last, Anna raised her head to look squarely into Victor's eyes. "Sergeant, what are you trying to say?" "The point I'm trying to make is that deceased individuals rarely report for duty." Senior officers discussed Elena's involvement in future SEAL training exercises in the command briefing room. Opinions were divided along anticipated lines throughout the heated conversation. Commander Stevens contended that she is a liability. Her presence breaks the unity of the unit. "She's qualified," Lieutenant Colonel Martinez retorted. "Her flight history is impeccable." "Records can be made," Stephen retorted. "She poses a risk to legacy." "Too much stuff. Too many inquiries." They. Senior officer of the ship, Captain Harrison, massaged his temples. "We're not talking about classified material here, gentlemen. Lieutenant Voss will carry out her responsibilities in accordance with her assignment to this operation." Someone whispered from the back of the room, "She's a ghost." It is the nature of ghosts to haunt enterprises. Arriving early for the following meeting, Elena stood outside the briefing room. She had heard enough to comprehend her predicament, being hardly accepted, frequently questioned, and always on trial. At the corners of her mouth, a little smile appeared. They referred to her as a ghost, although they were unsure of the accuracy of that description. Victor had trouble sleeping later that night. He kept replaying old video in his head as she pulled an unconscious soldier from the wreckage. The pilot's movements, her purposeful accuracy in the face of gunfire, and the fleeting view of her tattoo. He knew many of the pilots who had flown risky missions into hostile areas and had served 2 tours in Afghanistan himself. But what that pilot had done was unlike anything he had ever seen, refusing to depart until all soldiers were accounted for, landing in an active engagement, and evacuating wounded under direct enemy fire. According to the official narrative, she was killed when her chopper was shot down while she was being extracted. Her name was inscribed on the wall at Arlington. A memorial service had been held, and her family had received a flag. However, Elena Voss was extramural subjected to humiliation every day by others who had no idea what they were witnessing. Victor made a choice that would alter the course of events. He went back to the archives and looked for mission briefings, casualty reports, and personnel files. His blood froze at what he discovered. It had been a real helicopter crash. Elena's HH-60 had been shot down, and 3 soldiers had been killed. However, Elena Voss was not the pilot identified as Kia. It was Elena's best friend and co-pilot, Lieutenant Sarah Chun. They had changed the records. Sarah's name has been added to the mission roster, replacing Elena's. While Sarah Chun vanished completely from military records, Elena Voss was formally pronounced dead. Elena had been purposefully turned into a ghost. Victor went over to Chief McKinley during the breakfast shift the following morning. The elderly SEAL was sitting by himself, gazing into his coffee with troubled eyes. "Chief, I have a question for you," Victor murmured, slipping into the seat across from him. McKinley's head jerked up, his aged face turning pale. "About Black. Echo? That name, where did you hear it? Is it important?" Victor bent over. "I am aware that the pilot was Elena Voss. She didn't pass away, Ini. I'm aware that you were present at that crash." McKinley set down his coffee cup, his hands shaking a little. "Son, there's a reason why some stories remain untold. Not when the person who saved your life is also the one that everyone is treating like trash." Between them, the words lingered like a charge. McKinley closed his eyes and briefly examined each of his more than 50 years. He muttered, "She got us out of hell. We were all written off as casualties by the command. She returned twice. So why is she being treated as if she doesn't belong here by herself?" McKinley gave a sour laugh. "Because being a hero can occasionally make you dangerous to those who need heroes to remain dead. Did you ever witness someone being removed from their own narrative? Take a moment you won't soon forget. Maybe someone else will need it." It was intended to be a standard night training exercise that tested SEAL team coordination by simulating a rescue mission in inclement weather. However, routine turned into reality as the storm actually hit. Hurricane-force winds pounded the flight deck as the aircraft carrier rocked violently in 12-foot seas. 6 hours prior, the SEAL unit had been deployed to a nearby island for a simulated hostage rescue operation. Now, since the weather was swiftly getting worse, they were stranded. "We are no longer in contact with Team 7. The crowded command center heard the radio operator's announcement. They are 15 miles northwest, according to the most recent GPS coordinates. But the storm is moving more quickly than expected. Captain." Harrison looked grimly over the weather reports. "When will this be over?" "Sir, 8 to 10 hours. Perhaps more time." Chief McKinley replied, his voice taut with controlled fear. "They don't have 8 hours. 3 males with diabetes who are not taking their medicine are on that team." Commander Rodriguez, the ship's chief pilot, gave a firm shake of his head. "No responsible pilot would try to fly under these circumstances, sir. Just the crosswinds air reaching 60 miles per hour with almost no visibility." Elena listened to the debate while standing in the rear of the command center. She had arrived when she heard the emergency alerts, even though she had not been included in the original briefing. Someone said, What about emergency flares? Sir, Elena said, interrupting the conversation. They're on radio silence for operational security. No way to communicate new extraction coordinates. Guide them to a better Ilsa. I can get them. There was silence in the room. Commander. Rodriguez swiveled to look at her in utter shock. This is not a training exercise, Lieutenant. A helicopter would be torn to pieces by those winds. Professionally, Alilana walked over to the weather panel and studied the radar patterns. This is a natural storm corridor. Between these two fronts, she indicated a break in the weather system. That's suicide, Rodriguez said. If I come from the northeast and use the terrain to break wind shear. With no visibility, you would have to thread the needle between two rock walls. I've already done it. Alana's tone caused McKinley to glance up abruptly. Across the room, his eyes locked with hers, and like an electric current, recognition flowed between them. Give it to me. Elena said softly. Bird. I've arrived by plane worse. Captain Harrison paused, considering options that were not feasible. Despite sanctioning a suicide mission, 8 soldiers were relying on his choice. McKinley, Chief. Harrison looked at the ancient seal. Your opinion? McKinley gazed for a long time at Elena, recollections rushing back. One more storm. Another. Impossible rescue. It was another night when everyone said it was impossible. She used to talk like that, he remarked quietly. The Black Echo pilot was a girl. Elena received instant clearance. Launch. Her hands moved with accustomed efficiency as she checked the aircraft in the hangar before takeoff. This was a familiar place where instinct took control and uncertainty vanished. In anxious stillness, the ground crew around her checked and double-checked systems that they had previously confirmed twice. Victor showed up with a helmet bag at her elbow. He offered her a flying helmet with a small American flag sticker. His own personal touch, saying, I thought you might need this. Thanks, Elena replied, strapping the helmet on before turning to face him. If something happens, nothing's going to happen, Victor said. But you've got this. It was a vicious launch. Windjuice instantly grabbed the helicopter and threatened to smash it into the carrier superstructure. Ella Lanina fought the controls, using every ounce of her skill to keep the aircraft stable as it climbed away from the ship. In the command center, radar operators tracked Elena's progress on their screens. Her flight path looked insane, threading between weather cells, using mountain ridge lines to break the worst of the wind, and flying at altitudes that would normally be suicidal in these conditions. How is she doing that? Like the laws, Commander. Rodriguez mumbled as he observed the impossible moves. McKinley kept his gaze fixed on the screen. The SEAL team was huddled in a shallow cave with 4 men exhibiting signs of severe hypothermia and diabetic shock. The improvised landing zone was a postage stamp of flat ground, surrounded by crashing waves and jagged rocks. The helicopter was brought down in stages, using the aircraft's rotor wash to clear debris, while fighting crosswinds that tried to flip. The bird with every gust. The skids touched down with a jarring impact that rattled every bolt in the airframe. The rescue took precisely 12 minutes. Ilalanana shut down the engines and sat in the pilot's seat for a moment, hands shaking, slightly from adrenaline. Chief McKinley was waiting when she climbed out of the cockpit, his weathered face strewn with tears he didn't bother to hide. 12 years ago, he said, his voice breaking. The return flight was worse than the insertion, with 2 of the rescued men unconscious and the storm having gotten worse. Eleni flew using instruments and instinct, navigating by memory through winds. That would have destroyed most aircraft. I assumed you perished. Elena gave him a serious gaze and gave him a single nod. There was no need for words. Security camera footage of her landing was already making their rounds on the ship's internal network. Everyone would be aware of what they had seen before dawn. The following day, nobody would look Elena in the eyes in the briefing room. But it wasn't disrespectful this time. It came from awe. Within 48 hours following the rescue, the internal bulletin reached all of the officers on board the carrier via military channels. Formal notice. Update on personnel situation. Ellen Voss, a lieutenant. Officially exonerated of all charges related to Black Echo. An administrative error had previously resulted in a posthumous decoration. Present situation. On active duty. Operations specialist with a classification. Although the words held the weight of official validation, Alana's path from hero to ghost back to hero was too complicated to convey. In the ship's chapel, a little ceremony was planned once more. Just the acknowledgement of those who knew what it meant to be recognized in their world. No media, no fanfare. The chapel was full, although attendance was optional. In reverent quiet, SEALs, pilots, deck staff, and even officers who had previously shunned Elena assembled. Chief McKinley made his way to the he, was holding a battered military challenge coin on a little platform. The light struck the polished metal that had been handled for decades. "We kept this," he continued, his voice resonating well over the acoustics of the chapel. "Thought you'd want it." Back, Alna took the penny, instantly identifying it. Before it vanished amid the turmoil of Black Echo, she had carried it through 3 deployments. You could still see the inscription. Commander Rodriguez, the pilot who had just days before proclaimed her mission suicidal, stood up in the first row as Guardian Angel 160th Sword. There was something like humiliation tight in his face. "I assessed you based on rumors," he declared in public. Ella Lenine's remark was typical of her directness. "I never once looked you in the eye and saw the pilot standing in front of me. I made assumptions based on gossip and politics. The majority don't." Captain Harrison's announcement of a new scholarship program was the high point of the ceremony. Military bureaucracy had expedited the project, which normally took years to complete, in a matter of days. Harrison read from prepared remarks that female pilots pursuing combat aviation specialties will get full educational support through the Phoenix Grant, which was created in honor of Lieutenant Ellen Voss. The grant acknowledges that heroes shouldn't have to die in order to be honored, and bravery knows no gender boundaries. Uncomfortable with the attention, but aware of its importance, Ella Lenina sat silently through the cheers. She wasn't the main focus of the scholarship. It concerned the next woman who had encountered comparable difficulties and would require evidence that superiority could triumph over discrimination. Individual sailors came up to Elena after the ceremony and expressed their respect and apologies in a low voice. Many acknowledged that they had only ever heard stories and bits of information about Black Echo that had been twisted over time. Elena was requested to sign her flight handbook by a young female pilot who had just graduated from flight school. "My instructor said women can't handle combat stress," she told me. Elena signed the handbook with the straightforward words, "Seeing what you did, it changes things." Later that night, Victor discovered Elena at the hangar doing standard maintenance on the helicopter she had piloted during the rescue. Prove them wrong by proving yourself right. The storm caused considerable stress damage to the aircraft, but nothing that couldn't be fixed. Victor, carrying 2 cups of coffee, commented, "Funny thing about ghosts, which is now their evening ritual." Elena took the coffee and allowed herself a tiny smile. Sometimes they come back to finish unfinished business. Perhaps they never went. Perhaps people simply stopped observing. The crew was conversing. Victor went on to talk about Black Echo, the rescue, and suggesting you for the Navy Cross. It's past due, according to some of the older men. Ella Lenina's face became grave. Medals cannot alter the course of events. Those who failed to return home are not brought back. No, Victor concurred. However, they ensure that those who did return home remember their reason for being alive. Military families across the country have already expressed interest in the Phoenix Grant announcement. Elelena's story, which had been meticulously altered to conceal sensitive information, was emerging as a representation of fortitude and salvation. However, Elelena's true triumph did not lie in receiving scholarships or official recognition. Her shipmates would look at her and see a pilot who could make the difference when everything depended on her, not a diversity hire or a political statement when the next tough mission arose. At last, the ghost had been buried. All that was left was something stronger, a living legend. Like her entry, Elena's exit from the aircraft carrier was subtle. However, everything was different now. As she passed, the same sailors who had previously avoided her way now gave her a courteous nod. Her approach did not end the conversation. Rather, they created space for her to participate. Elena left something behind on her last morning on board at the mess hall, where she had consumed numerous meals in silence. A folded sheet of paper with a straightforward message written in her exact handwriting was hidden beneath the coffee. Maker. The next girl to be told she doesn't belong should take this seat. A young female radar technician who had only been there 2 days previously found the note. The same disdainful attitudes and hushed skepticism toward women in combat situations had been plaguing her. She realized she wasn't struggling alone after reading Elena's message. The note was laminated and hung on the wall close to Elena's old table, thanks to Chief McKinley's efforts. It quickly developed into an unofficial shrine where female crew members would stop during their breaks and find solace in the fact that Samiani had traveled this route before them. As a result of her transfer orders, Elena was sent to a training command post at Naval Air Station Pensacola, where she would assess helicopter pilots' combat readiness, making sure the upcoming generation of aviators fulfilled the requirements that may mean the difference between life and death in operating theaters was a meaningful job. However, her impact went well beyond her professional responsibilities. Victor launched a podcast called Forgotten Warriors after being promoted to staff sergeant, in part because of his work recording Elena's tale. Black Echo was the subject of his debut show, which included meticulously unclassified information regarding the operation that had made Elena famous. Victor told his expanding audience of veterans and military personnel that she didn't want attention. All she wanted was a moment to catch her breath. However, sometimes recognition is necessary for breathing, and recognition necessitates a person who isn't afraid to speak truth to power. Within military communities, the podcast episode became widely popular. Veterans who had served with other ghost service members, whose contributions had been downplayed, classified, or purposefully hidden for political reasons, poured in their comments. Elena's tale served as a springboard for more extensive discussions regarding the treatment of military people who didn't conform to preconceived notions. Beyond its initial focus, the Phoenix Grant Scholarship now supports any military member whose accomplishments have been disregarded because of their gender, color, or political inconvenience, not simply female pilots. A new generation of pilots, who were already familiar with her notoriety, were being trained by Elena at Pensacola, eager to learn from someone who had demonstrated that impossible. Missions were simply challenging ones. Young pilots approached her with a mix of reverence and curiosity. During her first week, Elena was approached by Korean-American pilot Lieutenant Sarah Kim, who had just graduated from advanced training. "Ma'am, I've heard tales about the carrier rescue, Black Echo, and what you did. To save those SEALs, you flew through a cyclone, right?" Elena gave the question some thought. "In order to bring 8 guys home to their families, I flew through a storm. Weather is all else. However, some felt it was impossible." "There are a lot of things said," Elena said. Opinions don't matter to the sky. That response made Sarah grin. According to my flying instructor, I'm too risk-taking and aggressive. Women should fly more modestly, in his opinion. Elena's face becomes a little more stern. What are your thoughts? Aggressive, in my opinion, is just what people refer to as competence when they don't anticipate it. Then follow your gut. Your instructors. Comfort level won't matter to the lives you save. A surprise parcel arrived 6 months after Elena left the carrier. A picture from the message that showed the current around her mounted note. Female crew members gathered. According to a letter from the young radar technician, no female sailor now ate by herself at the location, which had come to be known as Elena's table. Thank you for proving we belong here, was the letter's modest conclusion. Elena hung the picture in her Pensacola office with her challenge money and flight credentials. Every day, it served as a reminder to her that becoming a hero involved more than just one brave deed. Making room for others to discover their own bravery was the goal. Black Echo's ghost was at last at peace. However, pilots who faced their own challenging missions and their own moments, when everyone said it were still motivated by the legend of Elena Voss. Not possible. The greatest significant triumphs in aviation, as in life, frequently occurred in silence and were judged not by awards or accolades, but rather by the simple understanding that heroes are always there for those in need. From where are you watching? Have you ever witnessed a name emerge from obscurity? Leave the location. We're mapping invisible legacies this year. Follow us if you are moved by quiet courage. Her voice deserves to be heard more often.